strategies. Just want to thank you for attending both in person and for those of you on the phone. Please be sure that you're being courteous. Look down at your phones to ensure that your phones are on mute. We will open the lines at the end for Q&A so that we'll hear both from those who are present in the audience as well as those on the phone. I just want to make a few plugs for our community of interest and the direction that we're moving. We have an ongoing project, actually a couple, but one of which is, I think, extremely of interest to this community, and that's having to do with the cyber workforce. So we are working on cross-community of interest initiatives around how we might focus on 4 components of attracting, retaining, engaging, and thinking about creative strategies for all of the above as it relates to the cybersecurity workforce. With that said, for any of you who might have some innovative strategies that you have implemented both at the local level in your agencies or in your organizations, for those of you who are joining us from the private industry, we would love to hear from you, whether they relate to cyber or not. There are a variety of hiring flexibilities, as you all know, which OPM has granted specifically for this project, but it would be interesting for us as we collect best practices to be able to consolidate that, both for this community of interest and also to share across the ACT-IAC community as we move forward. So if you have anything to contribute, please reach out to myself or Deborah Tomczak, who is the industry chair of the Evolving the Workforce Community of Interest, and we'd be happy to consider including some of those best practices and examples from your own agencies or organizations as they relate to our project. We're also working on a presidential transition paper as it relates to workforce issues. If you're interested in reviewing that paper or being a part of just editing it and taking a look at what we have to offer, feel free to reach out to any one of us as well on the leadership team, and we'd be happy to share with you. It's not for public release, but we're happy to share with the community of interest. And lastly, we are really hoping to round out this community as an information sharing resource as well. So we hope to be able to bring updates and information about events or workshops or training that might be of interest to all of you. We are going to add those components both to our communications mechanisms, maybe in our emails just to share, as well as in our website, which our communications chair, Bob Clark, will talk to you about in just a second. But some of those updates include things like the free OPM webinar series. It's a 12-part series that they've launched on employee engagement. They just launched it this past Tuesday. It's completely free. I think it's the second Tuesday of every month. And it's eight of them, so I think now through November. So be on the lookout for that. We'll add it to our website as well. There's also a workshop coming up on May 9th that's hosted by the Potomac Forum on employee engagement and how to increase specifically your federal employee viewpoint survey scores, GAO, OPM, MSPB, DOL, and many other federal agencies are playing a part, as well as the Senior Executive Association will be looking to add content to that forum. It looks pretty interesting. SHRM conference, of course, is in June, and we have some other events and workshops and training that you may be interested in that we'll share with you as well. So with that said, I just want to introduce, I'm sorry?
Terry's relocation?
Yes, I don't have the information off the top of my head on that one, but we will add all of those kinds of relevant training. And if you have some to add to the community to share, we'll be happy to add those as well and make announcements about them. With that said, I just wanted to introduce Bob Clark to talk to you a little bit about what's going on the communications front and what you can expect from our website as we move forward. Bob?
A couple of things. One, just to give folks both on the line and in the room perspective, this topic that we're addressing today is one of our most popular topics. We've typically had very strong participation for workforce planning and human capital analysis topics, but when we put succession planning on, this may be our largest meeting of the year, and I wanted to make sure that everyone had the perspective. We have over 60 people participating. We have about 25 people in the room, and then an equal and potentially larger number online. So those of you who are in the room, you can't see them, but I want you to know they're out there. Hello to our friends at DFAS in Indianapolis. You're never able to come to the meetings in person, but I know that I was recently out in Indianapolis and met with the succession planning office manager, and I know that there are a lot of people from that office who are participating today. I did want to mention, you're going to see some communications from ACT-IAC regarding taking fuller advantage of our website. We have within the ACT-IAC website, we have an Evolving the Workforce Community of Interest webpage. And in there, we are going to be taking advantage of both, as Mika said, the ability to list activities both in and out of ACT-IAC itself, things like the SHRM conference. And related to that, we're going to be doing things, taking advantage of the blog and discussion capabilities there. I could very well see people within the human capital area. We have about 150 to 200 people between industry and government who are members of this community of interest. I could imagine members who are going to the SHRM conference talking together and perhaps putting together a government bird feather gathering at the SHRM conference. We want to make sure that everyone is aware that the capability to discuss amongst ourselves exists there, and so I'm going to be sending out a note to you telling you how to do that. There's also going to be some emphasis put on further communications rather than direct emails from me. They're going to be communications encouraging you to, well, one, the website is going to start contacting you automatically based on your profile. So part of what I'm going to be communicating to you is how to set your profile up so that you'll get the communication that you want from ACT-IAC on the schedule you want. There's an option for daily emails from IAC. There's also an option for weekly. And I think the best way to show you how to do it is to send you a little instruction sheet. So look for that coming from me, and look for a greater emphasis on using the Community of Interest webpage.
You will now be placed into conference. To mute your line, press *6. To unmute, press #6.
My apologies, there was a loose power cord.
And in conclusion, well, this is Bob Clark, the Communications Chair. We've just been talking about a number of administrative things. I'm now going to turn...
Good morning, everyone. As Debbie said, Chanel Porter from OPM. Just going to give you a little bit more background so you have some context into my portfolio. Predominantly, I've been responsible for Regulation 5 CFR 250, which is the regulation that creates parameters for how agencies need to manage their human capital. That includes all things talent management and succession planning. You may be familiar with the HCAF, or the Human Capital Assessment Accountability Framework. My team also manages that. I put all that out there to say that we currently just had a conclusion of the proposed reg process for 5 CFR 250, which will include modifications to the HCAF to become the Human Capital Framework, which then also has a lot of information about succession planning, talent management, and whatnot as a part of that. So some of the questions that you're going to see today are reflective of some of the regulatory changes that we're going to be requiring that agencies fulfill as a part of their talent management succession planning strategies. In addition to that, we'll have what's called an online resource guide for the HCF, or the Human Capital Framework, once the reg is published. Anticipate, keeping my fingers crossed, that it'll become final in mid-August. And at which time then we'll replace the HCAF with the HCF online resource guide on opm.gov. Definitely make sure the community receives all that information, because we'll be having extensive briefings, workshops, webcasts, you name it, to start publicizing all of the content. So with that, I'm going to introduce the panel. The first individual to my right, I have Rana Garrett from Department of Defense. Next, I have Kathleen Waters, who's the Deputy Chico at IRS. And finally, I have Carolyn Conlon. She also is from NSA, and I'll let them introduce themselves in terms of explaining their background more.
Good morning. Rana Garrett from Department of Defense. I have probably about 30 years experience in HR. I've done operations, advisory services, and I'm currently serving as the Director of Strategic Planning for the Department of Defense. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Hi, Kathleen Walters. I'm kind of an example of IRS's view on SES and succession planning in that I've been 2 years in human capital, but I was our Director of Privacy. I've been our Deputy Chief Operating Officer. I've worked in our Legislative Affairs Division. So I'm not a human capital, human resources expert by trade. I am by apprenticeship, I'd say. And so I'm very happy to be here and look forward to speaking with you.
I'm Carolyn Conlon from the National Security Agency, and like Kathleen, I'm not a cradle-to-grave HR person. I have an operational background in legislative affairs, policy, and so forth. But for the last 14 years or so, it's a long time, I've made the right-hand turn into the human capital world. And currently, I'm the technical director for our associate director for corporate leadership. And I am, the founding member and the director of our enterprise succession management program.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with just giving some insight into what OPM is doing related to succession planning, and then we're going to talk specifically about some of the questions that you saw in the handouts. One of the things, I'm just going to speak really generically about it, is that we're introducing the whole notion of practicing for what's called foresight, or anticipating the future trends in the environment in which our employees and our programs and whatnot will be facing. We're trying to be very proactive, to be literally anticipating what those future knowledge, skills, and abilities will be, so that way when the future approaches, we're not surprised by the knowledge, skills, and abilities that individuals need. That's a key aspect of integrating workforce planning into succession planning, because it does, as you know, it takes time to literally develop, hire, recruit, so on and so forth, individuals with the skills and abilities that we need. So we want to have agencies get into that mindset of that anticipatory kind of effect to say, okay, as we are planning, let's keep into account what are those future skills that we are going to probably have this position evolve to, in addition to the skills that they need today. And I'm not saying you necessarily need to look out 30 years, because that's one of the aspects of foresight, but even looking out 3 to 5 years is pretty significant, because, for example, within cybersecurity, a lot changes within that field rapidly, but it still is very helpful to have that as a part of your mindset. So you're going to see a lot of information coming from OPM that has that hint of foresight and anticipating the future skills and abilities. And that's one of the other things that we're working heavily on right now, is closing skills gaps. Probably you've seen it in some shape, form, or fashion in a lot of the work that we're doing, especially as it relates to the GAO audit. But that's going to continue. It's going to be heavily pressed throughout the regulation I mentioned, 5 CFR 250, because they go hand in hand. So as we're working to close skills gaps, we're asking that you, again, factor in what are those future knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're going to need, so that you hopefully don't have a gap in the future. And that's one of the key things that we're encouraging as a part of succession planning. The other thing, of course, is always leadership and knowledge management and information transfer. That I think will always be something that's critical, and that we will be always reinforcing, is to ensure that, again, make sure your individual employees have that. And one of the things we're also stressing is that we, for transferable skills purposes, we're really trying to get away from that notion of just having succession planning in terms of gaining knowledge, skills, and transfer information to one individual. We want to start to focus more on your network of employees to ensure that you have that hybrid of individuals with that knowledge that you have. So that way, if someone does retire or unexpectedly leaves, you're not left with a gap, literally, in terms of knowledge or that FTE. And so you could have someone, in terms of a junior person or even a senior person, be ready immediately to go ahead and start to fulfill the role. And that's a great way to then, incorporate succession planning, but also retention efforts and strategies, recruitment, and so on and so forth. So that's very broadly what we're doing over at OPM. So you'll see that, again, embedded throughout all of our guidance, a lot of the requirements, again, in the regulation and in the online resource guide that I mentioned.
Thank you, Shanaz. I just want to remind those of you on the phone to please look down at your handsets and make sure that you're on mute, just for the benefit of those who are in the room. Thank you.
Sure. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start with the questions that we developed. And please, if you have any questions, please let us know. So the first question is your succession plan aligned to your organization's workforce plan? And I'll
Start with me? Okay. So let me just explain it. The National Security Agency, we have three components that normally sit in one place in most agencies that you would say are human capital. We have an associate director for corporate leadership, we have an associate director for HR, and we have an associate director for education and training. So working together on a strategic plan goes like this with us. The HR directorate works with our mission managers to figure out what the needs are for workforce in the future. We then work with those mission managers to incorporate that information into our succession management process. So our process has three components, one of which is, and we are a rank-and-person organization. I don't know how odd that is for some of you who probably are not familiar with that model. So we start with trying to figure out what our target is. What are we trying to build towards? And it's not necessarily towards people, but towards people who can meet our mission needs. Those mission needs are incorporated in our what we call success profiles of our key leadership positions. So that is where we set the target, so to speak, for what we want to build towards. So those critical positions are identified by our mission managers for using various criteria that we give them. Is the position critical to the health of your organization? Is it a position, for example, that might take a long time to build success in? Is it one where you know you're going to have a gap in the future, even though you may not have one today? There are several of those. So that's how we align to the mission needs, since those positions reflect what the mission needs are. The second piece is then to assess the people who are interested in those jobs, and I can explain all that if you're interested in the mechanics of it, and then fill the gaps that we identify between what we need and what we have in what we call the development phase of the process. So it's demand, supply, and filling the gap, and that's how we go about strategically planning for the development that we need to invest in to ensure that our mission needs are met.
Thank you. Catherine?
So at IRS, I mean, to give you a little context, we have about 84,000 employees, and we are we have about 230 to 40 SES. We only have one political appointee, so I think it's different than some of the department level agencies. And we have some business units that are quite large, like upwards of 20,000. And our workforce plans right now are largely business unit specific. Each of our business units has an embedded human capital function. Although we are moving towards consolidation, we aren't there yet. We've made our first movements in consolidating some of them this spring. We are aspiring in the next, beginning in 2017, to create a comprehensive workforce plan for the IRS as a whole. So we're working towards that. So to answer the question on linkage to the workforce plan, within our individual units, that they are assessing always against their plan, the needs, the anticipated attrition, etc. But corporately, we don't have that holistic viewpoint yet. And it's something, it doesn't surprise me as was mentioned earlier, that workforce planning has been a hot topic here. That's a hot topic for us, looking at the future needs, the skills we may need in the future versus those we have now. So my answer, simplistically, is kind of.
Rhonda?
In anticipation of yes. So with Department of Defense, the answer to the question is yes. We do have a multi-year strategic workforce plan, and actually ours is legislatively mandated. So I brought some statistics with you so that you can kind of wrap your brain around what we're dealing with in Department of Defense. We have 700,000 civilian employees. In that demographic profile, we have about 600 occupations, of which there are 23 functional communities. We've aligned those 600 occupations into functional communities. We have 347 occupations that are white collar, and the remaining are blue collar. We have about 60% of our workforce is between the age of 40 and 60. That's important to know when you're doing succession planning. And then what might be surprising to some of you is the average number of years of civilian service that we have for our employee is 12 years. And the reason for that is because about 48% of our workforce starts their civilian career with prior military experience. So that's the workforce demographic profile that we're working with on building a succession plan. So we do have this iterative process. So I think the biggest message, the takeaway today is, regardless of where you're at in the journey of strategic planning, it's not a destination. It is an iterative process. And for the Department of Defense, we publish our plan biannually, and we work 18 months through that process to update the plan, refresh competencies, and look at gaps and develop strategies. And as you can imagine, it might take several months for us to coordinate that and get that approved through the Secretary of Defense's office. So with that said, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the governance structure and the framework on which we built our success. We don't have a perfect process, as you can imagine, with that many people and that many stakeholders. It's very involved. But as far as the framework is concerned, we have the functional communities that we deal with. We have the components, Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines. And then we have, other stakeholders like the financial management community, the manpower community, and we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail later on in the question session.
Thank you. That's actually a good segue into the next set of questions. One other thing I wanted to mention before I move on to the next questions is also, being in obviously the federal government, we're legislatively mandated to do a lot. And so, yes, succession planning is a great practice, but there's also that push to also ensure the alignment to mission and performance. As you know, GIPRA Modernization Act really started to push the whole notion of integrating human capital into agencies' performance. So some of you may be familiar with the OMB FedStat. Again, now because of those new requirements, human capital is very blatantly spelled out in the GIPRA Modernization Act statute, talking about that integration in human capital to demonstrate how we are using our people to meet mission. And so that's where you're going to also see a lot of new requirements to demonstrate where are you filling your gaps, how are you ensuring that your succession plans are allowing for this, so that way you will be successful. So just wanted to put that out there. So that's what the heavy push on the alignment piece is about. And obviously it's a good practice to have that cascading. One thing I'm going to ask our panelists as you're responding to your questions, one thing I think will be of interest, and I know we don't have a demo here today, but if you have any tools or resources that you use, for example, with NSA, and you were talking about tracking and monitoring, even at DoD, having that large amount of individuals to track and monitor, are there any tools that you use? Is it something as simple as Excel, or do you use something very sophisticated? So if you could just insert that into your responses, that'd be great as well. And I'll leave it to you if you want to offer demos in the future to, but with that, I wanted to go on to the next questions. I'm going to mix questions 2 and 3 because it goes off of what Rana was saying, because I think the two are together. One is, who's involved with the development of your succession plan? Caroline kind of talked about her structure, so that's really interesting, but also to integrate the whole notion of how often do you update it? Because it's a living and fluid role of document. If you could talk about those two together, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll start.
Actually, we'll start in the middle this
Change it
time.
up, okay.
So, all levels of leadership are involved at the IRS, and we do have a tool. We've created a leadership succession review tool that any employee who has an interest in moving up to, the next level, whether it's a frontline manager all the way up the chain, has the ability to go in and do a self-assessment. Then their manager does an assessment. It's based on competencies and very much linked to the ECQs. And then they have a discussion, a feedback discussion. The second level manager reviews it and either concurs or does not concur. And then our career learning plans are built off that. So managers at lower levels are involved through that process. And then it goes all the way up to the top where our Executive Resources Board, which the voting members are our 2 deputy commissioners and our chief of staff, they're involved at the executive level in terms of reviewing succession plans and actually making final decisions about successors. When it comes to SES, we do the review with all of our business unit leadership and then to the Executive Resources Board twice a year. We do a formal re-up of our leadership succession review for the lower levels of leadership every other year. This is a year right now where we're just in the process of that. And I'd say that there's very vibrant involvement throughout all levels. And again, employees have the opportunity to raise their hand and proactively go into the leadership succession tool and self-assess. And then for those who do engage in the leadership succession tool, we also have a web-based career learning plan that it links to. Right now, we don't have that web-based tool available to everyone, and I think it's really just a cost standpoint. So those are some of the tools we have, and that's sort of who's involved. And I'll turn it over to whomever is next.
Why don't we have Carolyn? And I'm also interested too, because a lot of us work in decentralized environments. DoD alone, you mentioned the functional areas. So how do you also incorporate your, I'll call them subdivisions, subcomponents into your planning as well, as a part of that?
Okay, let me start with the tool and then go to that. So we use the PeopleSoft system at NSA, and we love to customize the PeopleSoft system, as you can imagine. So we started with the succession management module in PeopleSoft, and then we customized a way to create this tool that really is the sort of the engine, at least for the first two phases of our succession management program. So this is how it goes. The first phase, as I mentioned, was profiling the key leadership positions, and they can be at any level. And we've done about 8 different succession reviews in the last few years, starting with the biggest one was...
If folks on the phone, if you could please put yourselves on mute, that would be great. Thank you.
We did an agency-wide senior succession review, so all the senior executives and senior leaders at NSA were invited to participate. And that is the beauty of the tool, as you've probably found out, is that you can bring in large numbers of people and get away from the who do you know. That I think is a huge benefit. It reduces some of the administrative burden as well, but I think the bigger benefit is that it allows you to be as inclusive as possible. So in that first phase, then the tool is a way for an incumbent or somebody else who's knowledgeable of the job to go into the tool and profile the job. And we profile the job beyond, we include competencies, we include experience, where, what kind of scope of responsibility, expertise, and anything else they want to comment on. So that profile is set in there, the incumbent fills it out, it goes to a career development board. We love career development boards at NSA. So it goes to a group of other senior leaders for input as well. So that profile, that target that we set is not just one person's opinion. We also ask about the success factors, so to speak, that are important for this job into the future, 3 to 5 years into the future. So we try to capture that as well. That is then the target for assessing the aspirants, as we call them, against the success factors. Those profiles are also posted online for anybody in the agency to go and see. They can also go into this online resource that we have and do a little gap assessment of their own. They can pick up to 10 of those profiles, fill out a survey on themselves against those success factors, again, experience, expertise, competencies, scope of responsibility, and get a little gap assessment that they can use to start a conversation with whoever helps them navigate their careers. Then the tool allows all these aspirants who you invite, we do it by grade level, normally by grade level. So everybody at the GS-15 level in organization X. It can be at any level though. We have some of them going down to the GS-12 level at this point. So some of the reviews are corporate, some of them are organizationally focused. And then all those people go in and they fill out an assessment, a survey about themselves, again, based on the success factors of the job, their own experience, expertise, competencies, and so forth. It's a self-assessment. The assessment, at least in part, goes to a supervisor who says, I agree or don't agree with your competency, strengths, and gap needs that you've identified, and this is what I think. The supervisor also assesses their subordinates who happen to participate in the review on their leadership potential. So we have 9 factors that we validated. We have behavioral indicators for low, medium, high. The supervisor has to rate each of those factors and then give an overall, and that's plotted into the 9 box for each of the positions. In the last part, this is where the tool can't do everything for you, because the last part is assessing people against those success factors, using all of the decision aids that our tool provides, but then having robust discussions about each of the aspirants. And we give equal time to every aspirant, those who are selected, not selected. The tool does send out written feedback to everybody who has participated, and then the hard work starts, and this is where lots of people get involved, and it's a continuous evaluation. To answer your second question, is the development phase. Okay, now we've identified who's on the bench, so to speak. We have a series of what we call bench coaches who work directly with those who are selected for the bench, and boards continuously discuss, these career development boards, each of the aspirants to assess and reassess their readiness. When we decide to have another agency-wide review, and we've already done that coming up soon, is when we will actually refresh, but in a sense, it's picking more jobs to have more benches for, because we couldn't do even all of our senior jobs at one point. We're really big. But it's really heartening to see that organizations are picking up on the corporate process and delving down more deeply into the lower levels and developing benches for that. I hope I answered all your questions.
I'm just going to repeat the question just in case those on the phone forgot what they were. So the 2 questions are, how often do you reevaluate and update your succession plan? You kind of already answered that. And who is involved with developing your succession plan?
So in Department of Defense, I indicated earlier that we update it every 2 years. And because of the complexity and the depth and breadth of a Department of Defense plan and the number of people that it impacts, you can imagine that we would need to have a governance structure to drive participation. And so we do. So starting at the top, the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness actually signs out the approved plan to Congress every other year. And so I'll go down from there. We have executive leaders that meet on a quarterly basis and set the direction and determine priorities. So even though the plan is published every couple of years, it is a living document, and there is room for adjustment. Need we have to do that? We also have what I referred to earlier as the functional communities. So we have work groups in the functional communities across the 22. And we also have component integrators that we have a separate venue for. And then we have what I call a competency management advisory group. So all 3 of those groups work and meet every other month, sometimes quarterly, and discuss very technical issues in their line of effort. And then anything that we have from those work groups are briefed and addressed and provided guidance from the Executive Steering Committee. So important to facilitate all of these groups and get things to the right places for approval is the Strategic Human Capital Planning Office that sits at the department level, and that is my team in which I lead that effort. So you can imagine with that governance structure and the formal codified expectation of what each role and responsibility is for each of those groups of people drives really participation from the executive, top leadership, all the way down. And we can talk a little bit if you have questions about how does that get to the line manager. You didn't ask, but I think you did before about the tools. We do have 2 tools that we use, and the first is what we refer to as the Defense Competency Assessment Tool. And very similar to what Caroline was talking about with regard to assessing critical competencies and determining the need for the future. We have a tool that we deployed in 2014, and the goal eventually is for it to be available for use for every employee and every supervisor. Of course, when you start out with 950,000, you got to get after the priority first. So what we looked at doing first was evaluating and assessing what we consider to be the mission critical occupations that are determined by these work groups and approved by the Executive Steering Committee. So the Defense Competency Assessment Tool, we have industrial psychologists that work in the Strategic Planning Office who facilitate competency modeling for occupations. And so we've gotten after the mission critical occupations, and we are now continuing our journey to include all occupations at the individual level. So what we're doing now is each employee has the ability to take the assessment. The supervisor then also takes the assessment, and that is what determines the gap. And that can be used for developing training and development plans. And it really, what we wanted to do is drive employee engagement. So in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, we didn't do so well in employee engagement. And so that's one of the tools that we're looking to get after and drive that conversation. So that's the first thing. And then the second tool that we use is the forecasting tool. And we have, at the aggregate level, meaning at the department level, when we host planning sessions, we talk about future needs. And so in these work groups, we provide data decks on a quarterly basis that help facilitate the discussion in these work groups on several levels. Expected retirements, gains and losses. And when we use the forecasting tool, we look at the last 6 years of historical data and then projecting 5 years into the future. But of course, you can't just use the tool without applying some art to it. In the Department of Defense, and I'm sure in many federal agencies, part of our challenge is the unstable security environment. You don't know what you don't know is going to happen, so you have to kind of know what the emerging missions are, take the tool into consideration, and then plan from there. And so that's really one of my key messages also, is strategic planning really is an art informed by tools and scientific kind of stuff. So you have to use both, and you have to have top leader executive participation and endorsement in order to make it happen. I wanted to get this in somewhere today, but I think the most important thing for human resource professionals and executives to know is, you're always going to have folks who are interested in the very operational, today's crisis, how quick can you fill my job? I need somebody on board. But it's really the human resource executive that needs to steer and guide this effort in strategic planning, because if you don't, you're always going to be managing the crisis of the day. You're not going to be prepared for an exit of a generation or a needed occupation. So I don't want to get on my soapbox about that. I hope that answers the question.
I concur with you wholeheartedly on that. That's something we hear a lot is leadership involvement at all levels. And you're doing such a great job of setting me up to segue to the next question. So with that, I'm going to actually start with you again, Rana. I'm going to integrate the two questions because I think they go together again about what we're talking about. One is about kind of like, does your organization have a policy or SOP on how you want to, or how you should manage your strategic planning, succession planning effort? Most importantly, how is it communicated within and across your organization? Going back to the line manager's role, because they also have an integral role with literally helping actualize or implement the plan. So how do they know what their role is, what's even contained in the plan, etc.? So we can start with me,
sure.
And then go with Kathleen in just.
Sure. In Department of Defense, almost everything is codified in an instruction or a guidebook or something. With this monumental effort, yes, there is an instruction that is published, and not just published, but we actually have a formal communication plan that we use to update the guidance, and it outlines both the governance structure that I talked about, and we actually have 6 principles and guidelines that we codify in this written. So I kind of want to give you that real quick. The first one is the commitment and participation of top leadership. You got to have that. The direct link between the department's mission and our strategic plans and the outcomes. It talks about the identification of critical skills and competencies that are needed now and in the future, and why and how. It talks about the development of recruitment retention strategies to address the gaps in the mission critical and other key positions, and that's the leadership positions that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then we also have a codified leadership and functional training program. You remember when I talked about the competency assessment tool that should drive employee performance and the ability to define in the conversation with their leader what their aspirations are as far as what their current competencies are. That should drive that discussion, and we have leadership and functional technical training programs in place to facilitate that effort. And then last but certainly not least, there has to be something in place to assess your progress as you move through the couple of years. We can't just publish it and then come back to it in 18 months. Believe it or not, it is a 2-year process to publish this plan, iterative, and we have metrics in place, we have reports in place that monitor progress and are reported out to executive leaders quarterly and line managers as well.
Okay, Kathleen?
So codification, yes, for our non-SES leadership succession, it's very well codified because that has been pretty set for quite some time without really significant changes. The SES is in the process of being updated in terms of our standard operating procedures, because with new leadership, they have different viewpoints on how leadership succession should be done for the top leaders of the agency. And we had a new deputy commissioner come last summer, the deputy commissioner that oversees our support functions, including human capital. And so we're in the process right now of updating that. But codification is not communication, right? We've got all kinds of codes. I mean, the IRS likes, rules. We are lawyers and accountants. And so we use a variety of ways to communicate down the chain. We have a website called iManage that we've created that's just for managers. They get a code to get in. And we do a lot of communication to managers through that, as well as linking them to the tools they need to have the conversations with the employees to understand how the leadership succession review process works. And then, of course, we use a whole variety of other communication tools, from internal kind of leadership postings. We do manager communications almost every week. So there's all kinds of ways that we communicate it, because I never assume at this point that people are going to read the code, right? We're used to reading tweets, and some of these SOPs are 50 pages long. So we really try to help them and give them tools that are more user-friendly to communicate their role.
We considered writing a policy and decided against that for the time being, because we were a startup and we didn't even know if our effort was gonna last. At this point, I'm happy to say NSA is undergoing a huge reorganization / transformation. You may have read about that. And lo and behold, there are 3 pillars to this transformation: people, integration, innovation, and in the new people office, it's a workforce development office, there is a whole division for succession management. So to me, that's codification enough that it's gotten legs over these last few years, and I guess we'll have to start putting more stuff down on paper. But we do have business rules, we have charters for our career development boards that oversee the process. We did form what we call a corporate career development board, which is the deputy directors of our major components. So they're not HR people, they're mission people who actually run the senior succession management process. And they not only manage the positions and the people for the so-called corporate positions that they've identified, they also oversee and make accountable the organizations below, who are also managing senior benches and senior positions. So that's our governance structure, so to speak. We've got business rules that we've set up. We've got a common language, all embedded in the process and in the tool that fortunately people are beginning to use at the corporate level and below. We've created over the years, and this has gotten legs too, especially with our new NSA 21 transformation, a series of people called, we love acronyms, I won't give you the acronym, it's Senior strategist for succession planning and leadership development. So it's just been determined, just yesterday, in fact, that all of those folks, minus one, because the one oversees a smaller organization, would be DICEs, would be SESers. So that, to me, shows that this process is something that people value, and they're putting people who are senior people in charge of making sure that the process continues at all levels. I think that's probably about it. They're called SPALDs. It's a horrible acronym, but it's become common lingo around NSA, so that, to me, that's a good thing. I've done about 300 briefings on enterprise succession management as far as outreach goes, and my team does training and information sessions all over the place for career development boards, for what we call senior days at NSA. We embed the information into our leadership training courses so that as many people as possible know about it, get excited about it, and want to do it for themselves.
Great. Let's shift gears a little bit and start talking now about diversity and inclusion as a part of your succession planning efforts. Do or should government agencies include specific considerations of broadening the diversity of their management and senior leadership ranks as a part of the succession planning programs? I'll just leave it open for whoever. I think I kind of went through each of you to start first. So you want to start?
I'd like to start.
Go ahead.
Yeah. That's a really good question, and the Department of Defense currently does not include diversity in our strategic workforce plan. We have a separate office that addresses that. Currently in the strategic workforce plan, we look at numbers of people, we look at skills, competency gaps, but we are currently in what I call a 6-month strategic review, and one of our lines of effort in that strategic review is to look at how we can include diversity in our strategic workforce plan. I mean, I believe as part of your succession plan, you have to include diversity, but to what extent and how, that's kind of what we're looking at and mulling over with our diversity and leadership stakeholders.
So at the IRS, one of the things I'm most proud of is that kind of consideration of diversity and inclusion has become part of who we are. Like, I think part of it's because, as I've heard, our commissioners say, IRS and SSA are the two agencies that deal with the most, diverse population of Americans of any agencies, right? We pretty much deal with everyone at some point, even if they don't want to deal with us, right? So it's important for us to understand our constituency and to reflect them. And so what I'd say is that I think it's very important for agencies to consider diversity and inclusion, but it can't start at the management level, right? Because if your succession planning is going right, your employees who come in at a low level become your managers of the future, right? And so it has to start from the base, right? What's the diversity? And we do look very closely at, as people move up the chain, are there barriers, right? Are there barriers? Are there certain groups or folks who aren't making it to the next level, right? So it's part of our look all the way up, and we, I think, have done quite well because it is part of our culture. You look at our SES, and we've got over half of our SES are female, which I think is perhaps different than some other places. We've got a really good base of diversity, and of course, as we all know, diversity is diversity of thought. We look for a mix of internal as well as external. That's really important to us as well, to get that diversity. So I really do think it's important, but I think if you start at the management level, it's too late.
Yeah, I would agree that NSA diversity and inclusion is part of all of our decision-making about people and other things. So I early on went to our EEOD folks about the process that we had at least put down on paper and said, will this get us to where we need to be, or at least be a part of that? Unfortunately, I guess, you don't know who the minorities and those that you would like to put into your diverse pool are ahead of time, so we can't deliberately do that, but after the fact, we always do a diversity review of the results of the benches. So first of all, the EOD expert I talked to said, I love your tool so much, I think you should go sell it. It's so great. So I don't think it's that good that we would sell it. But what she loved about it is that it allowed us to bring in hundreds of people at a time, giving opportunities to hundreds of people at a time, tapping potential wherever it might be, who might otherwise be overlooked. They're the quiet person in the corner, I forgot them, I sent them over to another organization or outside the building. This allows us, it's a great use of technology, I think, in that regard, that it allows us to bring in lots of people who will all be considered equally with everybody else who aspires to any of those benches. So that's how we do it. The process is defensible. Over and over again, we've tried to improve every step of the way how we assess the people who are aspiring to these positions, to these benches. And so far so good. Our review for the agency-wide senior review was that the minorities actually participated at a higher rate than everybody else, and they were assessed almost equally. A lot of them were assessed to be put on a bench equally with all of them were with everybody else. They were just assessed a little bit later on in the process. We have a Ready Now, Ready 1 to 2, Ready 3 to 5 year scale, and more of them were in the 3 to 5 than in the Ready Now, Ready 1 to 2. So not so bad for a first go round, and we just try to improve and bring in as many people as possible so that, as you say, that pool is big to begin with, whether it's at the senior level or below.
I'm just going to pause, and because we went through a lot of information so far, and I'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions. We'll start in the room. And I have some more questions to ask, but we can give our audience an opportunity. So do you have any questions about anything we've talked about in terms of strategic alignment and relating to succession planning, diversity, inclusion, so on and so forth?
I'm just curious, it's very impressive, obviously, the detail that you guys go through to put together all these plans, and they're multi-year in the DOD's case. I'm just curious if you have the ability to measure the success of these programs.
Let me just repeat the question for those on the phone. So the individual asked about literally the efforts that are undertaken, namely by DOD, to assess the efficacy of their efforts, especially since it's so involved in multi-year, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it's a great question, because no program is good unless you know it's good by some measured process, right? So as part of our last principle, I talked about the ability to measure and monitor progress. So with the competency assessment tool, we know our gaps, we do reviews with the data decks. We look at numbers with components, what is the under or over utilization of skills. And so the review process, we have determined at the aggregate level, at the enterprise level, what we consider to be unacceptable staffing gaps. And so that measure is reviewed and approved by the executive steering committee. So at the aggregate level, we review and report out. So that's really based on numbers. Competency assessment, the competency assessment tool, we have criticality indexes for each type of skill, and we look at where the gaps are there on a regular recurring basis, and that's where we determine what progress we've made over time in either building the bench or going out and recruiting experts from the private sector. To tie back to the diversity question, one of the questions I've posed before our work group is, let's define diversity when we talk about strategic workforce planning. Are we going to look at race, national origin, age? And for Department of Defense, I gave you a statistic early on that said we have 48% who are prior military. So the diversity of thought, where you've got to have people sitting around the table that don't all look and think alike. So the progress that is measured by metrics that have been approved by the senior leadership team and that review process is how we determine whether or not we're successful, whether it's a short fix or a long-term view. Does that give you enough?
Kathleen or Carolyn, would you like to respond?
I'd say we have quantitative measures. We look at bench strength, right, for each level of leadership. However, I've spoken with our folks recently about, looking at some qualitative measures, and we really don't have those in place yet. We aren't, other than the leadership and succession review planning, we can't do assessments that of all of our employees. We can't mandate that because of we have a very strong union, and so we haven't been able to negotiate that yet. We have a number of different leadership development programs. We have frontline readiness program, a frontline program for those new managers, senior manager readiness, senior manager, executive readiness, executive development. And in each of those programs, I'd like to see more qualitative of the people who went into the programs, how many of them actually, then apply for that next level job, how many of them get that next level job, right? Looking at the quality of the developmental programs and our attraction to it. So our biggest measure is ensuring that we have that bench strength, but I think there's a lot more we should be doing, and I encourage others to do to ensure that all of your planning and all of your programs are actually effective in getting you the right person in the right job at the time you need them.
Okay, so we haven't done a full-blown evaluation, but I can tell you what we're using as our measures. My first measure is when the deputy director said who's on the bench in making a decision about a senior person, I thought that's success because he knows about it, he's using the lingo, and he values the process. So, I mean, that's obviously not something formal, but it made me sit up and think maybe this is a pretty good thing. We have a few measures that we use. Readiness. So we use these career development boards, these senior leaders who are on the career development boards, to tell us over time as they and other senior leaders work with the benches, the so-called bench coaches, has the readiness improved. So we actually track that. We do a little arrow up if somebody is 3 to 5 in the beginning of the process, and now we're almost 2 years into the agency-wide senior review, how many people have increased in readiness. We have a little risk model that we came up with based on 2 risk factors, vacancy and readiness. There are others in the literature. So vacancy, we can't ask somebody, are you leaving tomorrow, are you retiring, or whatever, but we have a 4-year rotation model in the senior ranks at NSA. So vacancy has to do with how long you've been in that job, because if you're up close to the 4-year mark, then it's term limit time. So we use that as one of the factors, and then this readiness, how many people on the bench who are ready at these various levels. So we have a red, yellow, green kind of thing, where you can look across the positions in your organization and see where you fall. So there could be a lot of people in ready now for one job, and if the person is, the incumbent is going to be there a while, I mean, you're way up on the green scale. But we have other jobs that one had absolutely no aspirants, so there you go, there's nobody on the bench, ready or not, and the person was going to be up to their 4-year mark soon, and that's blinking red, so that's a way to show that you've got some risk there. The biggest thing, and people keep telling me to publicize this more, is that we track who actually gets the target positions, that is, the positions that are on the bench for, or who gets a stepping stone position, because we're all about giving people experience too. Most of the feedback has to do with a person needs experience in a certain place, learning a certain thing, dealing with certain partners. It's across the board. So we track the stepping stone positions. If a career development board says you should act as the deputy first, for example, in that organization, or you should apprentice here, or go get what we call a joint duty assignment there, we use that as a way to track. And so far, since we have been tracking, I guess I can't give you the number of positions, but of all the positions for which we have a bench, it's about a 65% rate of people who either get that job from the bench or get a stepping stone position leading to success, we hope, in that position. So the risk model, the readiness moving up or down, and the rate of placement of people in the experiences or the target positions. That's what we've used so far.
So I think that's a good point. I have one alibi real quick. You just made me think of something. I talked about in the beginning how this is a very iterative process. One of the things we're looking for in the future, and it's way in the weeds, is what is the return on investment for certain things. For example, the competency assessment tool drives training, And so what is the return on investment with the type of training that was given to that candidate, and where did they go with that training? Did it position them? Were they promoted? We're not there yet, but that's part of the vision. And then the other thing that I neglected to mention earlier is we are currently on the cusp of using our competency models that have been validated and uploading them to OPM for use in USA Staffing to screen candidates. So quality of candidates on referral lists will also be a future measure, and so you might be thinking, well, how do you measure that? That's also a good question. We're not there yet. We're going to collaborate with others and OPM and maybe come up with some metrics in which to do that. But that's really what everybody is looking for, the right candidate on the right list at the right time, and the right training for your current workforce so that you can continue to promote and motivate and incentivize for those who work hard for you.
I'll just put a plug in for quality of applicants. We have what's called the CHICO, or Chief Human Capital Officer Manager Satisfaction Survey, that we've had in place for several years now, at least 5 years I think, where literally, and we have an applicant quality and satisfaction survey as well. So when a manager makes a hire, or even does not actually hire an applicant but goes through the process, we actually give them a survey through the agencies about their experience with the hiring process. And we also do factor in questions about the quality of applicant as well. It's not perfect, but it is something to help as an indicator. We're actually looking to update that, so that could be a tool. If you're not familiar with it, I would suggest speaking with your Chief Human Capital Officer and your Human Capital staff, because all the agencies have access to the tool. Each individual agency deploys it differently, but you do have access to your data that you could use as an indicator.
Before you go to the phone, I just want to reiterate that this whole discussion is off the record. Anybody who wants a quote or summary of what's going on today, please contact one of us and we'll get you to the right person. This is being videotaped, and a link, unedited version will be available in a week or so, and if you want, you can share that with your peers.
And Chanel, I have a question I want to throw out before you go to the phone as well, and that's around the predictive type of strategy that you were talking about, which is great because it's embedded in all of our panelists' processes here. And I love the tie back into engagement, because really it's a huge cycle. My question is around, since I sit in labor now and I get the benefit of hearing from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics about the future of work and predictions around what that will look like in the gig economy and moving forward, has OPM given thought in job design and what the future of work will look like as it impacts actual positions and the definition of work, so that agencies can sort of catch up to that? Because right now the focus on millennials, but millennials are already here. The iGen generation joins us in 5 years. And so beyond that, I often wonder, what are we thinking about as a government with regards to the future of work and the model for what that looks like?
That's a great question about the future of work, because that's actually one of the reasons why my team was established, is to answer that very question. Yeah, and I was talking about foresight in terms of, like, literally can go out, they teach you how to do forecasting 30 to 50 years out. Yes, it's imprecise and it's kind of crazy to think that far out, but those are the kinds of things that we're trying to develop our sophistication to figure out. Obviously, we'll update the models as they come, but we're really developing scenarios or working towards that so we can answer that very question, so that way then all of our guidance, policies, so on and so forth are informed by that. So we can exactly do what you said, is get ahead of those types of things, because if we knew this whole notion of the millennial generation, so on and so forth, and what their expectations were around the future of work, we could have done things maybe 5-10 years ago to modify our work environments and even the nature of work to then reflect that. And that's actually exactly what foresight in our group is really about because of that. Now, some things you all know will be bigger things to address. Some will take congressional action, for example, in terms of some of those major overarching challenges and changes that need to be made. But there are things we can do now. We can inform the agencies about maybe something as simple as the way you structure your work environment. Classification of positions obviously is one of the big things that we'll have to look at from an OPM perspective. But those are the things that we're looking at to do that. So that's an excellent question.
That's a good, it made me think of something that we expect our work groups to do, in the functional communities especially, is the strategic plan process not the plan, the published plan itself, but the process itself should drive conversation about what is needed in the functional communities with regard to things like expanded hiring authorities, different kinds of compensation. And so we do use those venues and ask people, the stakeholders, to tell the human resource strategic planners, what is it that you need? What is it that you have, first of all, right? That's the first question to people. What hiring authorities do you currently have? And we're talking functional communities. So I like to use acquisition as an example. What authorities do you currently have? How often did you use that authority? And so those are with the data decks that we provide. And what is it that you're not able to get what you want with your current authority and left and right parameters? So all that to say this, that entire strategic workforce planning process with those stakeholders should drive things like legislative proposals through the appropriate chain of command.
I think even things like, the job design, for instance, using the reemployed annuitant programs or part-time or job sharing can also be thought of, but it's something that's often scary because people are really worried about giving up their FTE. But as you look forward to what kind of work environment we're all going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we need to be thinking about that as well.
Well, that's one of the things that we're seeing now is the future of work is really project-based, and it's almost here now,
Yes.
especially in the private sector. We're not there as a cultural in terms of federal government, but that's what we're pushing because it's one of those things that we don't want to get hit in the face with when it's actually here and everybody else is there but us. So we're trying to shift, again, that mindset of anticipatory type of understanding what the environment is pushing us towards and the market. And we have to force us as literally the entire federal government to get us there, or else we're going to be left behind again. And then we'll be struggling with the same questions of how do I recruit people who want to come when everyone else is over here, but we're not there yet. So we won't be that glamorous looking type of employer. So that's something we struggle with. I want to pause and give those on the phone an opportunity to ask any questions because we only have about 15 minutes left. Is there an operated mediated? How do we do?
No, it's wide open, unfortunately.
So those
Okay.
of you on the phone, if you could unmute your lines if you have a question, and we'll try to go about it as organized as possible.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello? This is Joanna Lang.
Hi, Joanna.
Hi. I have a question for the group. I've heard a lot about the future of work. Are you using future analysis scenario planning?
We are. I mean, IRS is in the process of kind of looking at what, we call it the future state of the IRS. We along with many other agencies, our systems were built in the 60s or 70s, and we've been patching them and to the extent we could. We still deal with a lot of taxpayers on the phone or in person, right? And we are trying to completely, do a redesign, really based on early of the 2000s, right, when the internet started. So we have created even vignettes for both the tax community, the taxpayer, as well as the employee, that are scenarios of how things could work in the future, right? Because there's a lot of fear about change, not just within our agency. And our agency is, we've got, in the next few years, we'll have over 50% of our employees retirement eligible. We were 100,000 employees a couple years ago. We're now 83,000. We've been losing about 3,000 or 4,000 a year, and we've been on a hiring freeze, exception only, we're heading towards our 6th year. So the equation, doesn't necessarily even out, and we're really having to put a lot of work into inspiring folks to feel comfortable with what would be a major transformation, both inside and outside the IRS, because there are a number of external stakeholders who prefer that, for example, their constituents have an office to go to rather than perhaps getting on a computer and quote, Skyping with an assister. So we're doing a lot of scenario planning largely to get the buy-in of our internal and external stakeholders into our future state design.
For OPM, one of the things.
I'd be really interested how you're evaluating those future analysis scenarios. That's a much longer conversation,
Yeah.
I'm quite sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, maybe we can.
If you registered for this event, you would have gotten a flyer with contact information from us. So this is Debbie Brown. If you contact me, I can put you in touch with the panel member that has. If you have you want more information, just let me know and I'll put you in touch with them.
Thank you.
So one of the things we're working to do at OPM is do more outward facing and pushing information out to agencies instead of being more in a reactive mode. That's why I really wanted to emphasize the online resource guide for the Human Capital Framework. That's going to be our one-stop tool for everything because one, just like everyone else, limited resources, and so we want to make sure it's very accessible. So again, it's all predicated upon the publishing of our reg, but one of the things we're going to be doing on a regular basis is for every start of the administration publish what's called the Federal Workforce Priorities Report. That's our effort to do something like integrate the whole notion of the scenarios and those anticipatory environmental situations we're projecting, so to speak, or anticipating as a part of our environmental scanning efforts. And that will be used as a tool for agencies. It's not going to be probably perfect science, but it'll be an informative tool to say these are the types of workforce changes we're anticipating that will happen 5, 10, 15 years from now, so that way we can push it out to agencies as a part of their planning efforts. Because we realize that not everyone has the resources and capabilities to do environmental scanning on their own, have a whole entire foresight function, scenario planning, so on and so forth, so we want to serve as that as a resource for you for that. So that'll be coming out shortly.
So real quick response for the Department of Defense. We did do scenario planning. We did worst case, and we also did most probable case in functional communities. So when we did the environmental scan in the functional community strategic workforce planning process, those are the scenarios that we gave them on which to build their strategies and plans.
I feel like a celebrity here. I'm putting in plugs for all the different things we have going on. One other thing, though, we're also put a plug in for, and this is for those who are interested. Again, because of constrained resources, my team put together a government-wide environmental scanning team. We call them ESETs, or Environmental Scanning Execution Teams. Really knowing agencies, again, can't do environmental scanning per se on their own. So we're going to be looking at re-upping that process on a regular basis so that we as a collective unit can leverage the information that we all put together. So if you're interested in that, Debbie has my contact information. You can go ahead and send her a note and we can get you a part of that process moving forward. And that's, again, going to be one of those institutionalized things that we do as a collaborative effort for foresight.
Great.
We have, we still have a good amount of time, like 10 minutes. Does anyone else have a question on the phone or even in the room? Okay. One of the things I did want to ask is, the whole notion of succession planning, yes, is about leadership succession. But again, in light of what we were talking about in terms of the future work, whatnot, does your succession plan start to factor in, or does it already factor in the non-leadership type positions for employees? You talked about the reduction in your workforce. We talk about gaps and whatnot. And because we all know we have to do quote unquote more with less, how are you guys factoring that into your succession planning efforts for those that may not even want to be in leadership positions but need to be as a part of that succession conversation? We'll start with NSA.
We are not there yet at NSA. It is part of our transformation that this Enterprise Succession Management Program will be expanded to include our technical leaders. And that's a phrase we use. I don't know how commonly it's used across the government. We got a whole lot of them, as you can imagine, at NSA, and our non-supervisors. We allow non-supervisors and, of course, our military integrees into our, in fact, in some cases, they're required to take our foundational leadership training, but we do not include them in our succession planning yet. We just didn't have the bandwidth to do that.
So we have pockets. Now again, our leadership succession program is open to anyone at any level who wants to voluntarily participate. But in terms of a comprehensive look, we don't have a comprehensive look top to bottom yet. In certain key kind of mission critical areas, we do, for example, cyber. I hear you're doing a cyber. I mean, cyber for us is very important because we have all of your information as well as every company and individual who pays or should pay. So cyber is huge for us, and so we are looking at it top to bottom there. But it is not in our future state as we're looking at sort of the needs of the future. We are looking at it top to bottom, but getting to something that was said earlier, in our future state, we see more matrix management, which right now doesn't quite fit with the way that positions are classified. And so it makes, it kind of mixes up sort of the way we do things now completely and how we look at positions, etc. So we are looking at it for the future, but right now it's more in pockets of mission critical occupations where we are, where we really have some critical needs.
So for the Defense Department, yes, we do all. The functional communities look at both leadership and technical aspects for both training and development and competency gap assessment, and then the recruitment integration that we're doing. I do want to clarify though, if you'll recall, I talked about focusing on mission critical occupations first. The evolving of our planning process will get to including every single person, 700,000, but currently the plan is focused on mission critical occupations. And the Department of Defense has a very mature leadership program with a deliberate pathway and assessment process. And we also have that for functional career programs as well. I think integrating that into a strategic workforce planning process that you look at the entire life cycle, the entire HR life cycle, which is from recruit, retain, train, and develop. And to, I think it was you, Kathleen, that talked about the labor challenges. You have to go through the unions with certain parts of your strategic workforce planning efforts. So we currently don't include performance management as a part of that. You can imagine what that might be like for 700,000 employees. So we do the entire life cycle minus performance management because we manage that under a separate policy.
Well, speaking of performance management, does your performance plans for your SES incorporate anything related to succession planning? Whether it staff certain targets or institute a process within their subcomponents or anything related to having accountability standards, I'll call it.
For us, there's no corporate policy that says that has to be an objective in a senior executive's plan.
Yeah, IRS is the same. We don't have a corporate kind of commitment or policy on that.
It doesn't specifically talk about strategic workforce planning, but there is one that talks about executive management of people.
Sure.
Yes,
And
yeah,
that includes
we
all
have,
of that.
yeah, we have a general kind of human capital management that specifies some things, but it doesn't get to specifics on succession planning.
I think one of our biggest challenges might be your challenge, and that is to get people to realize strategic planning is not an HR effort.
That's right.
It's an HR-led effort most of the time, but it truly is an executive leadership responsibility across the board in every functional occupation.
Well, HR is not an HR effort, right? I mean, our managers are critical partners in all that we do, from the hiring to disciplining, etc. So I always like to tell folks that they like to dump things on HR. It's HR messed this up, but we really are all partners in human resources, and we all play a critical role in that process.
Thank you. Any questions on anything that we've discussed thus far? Or anything that we haven't and you're interested in learning about or asking a question? Okay, those on the phone? All right. Well, I guess we'll just end a minute or two early then. I want to thank our panelists today for all of your insights and the breadth of information that you provided. We really appreciate it. Thank you for those on the phone who participated, and of course those that were in attendance today.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who missed the opening because of the technical difficulties, I just want to reiterate that we'll be sharing information about upcoming events and workshops. We'll have again this archived version of the video for today's session that we'll share with you. And we are looking for your best practices on any hiring flexibilities or strategies that you may have implemented at the local level with all of the wonderful flexibilities that OPM has offered as it relates to the cyber workforce or other workforce issues. We're happy to collect that, so please feel free to send it to me, Mika Cross, your government chair, or Debbie Brown, and look out for more information from the Evolving the Workforce Community of Interest. Thanks again to our wonderful panel. Thanks for those of you in the room and those of you on the phone. Have a lovely day.